Science Fiction University.
Hello and welcome to Science Fiction University.
We're your fan and writer hosts. I'm Blue Gal.
And I'm Driftglass. You can visit Science Fiction University at our website, sciencefictionuniversity.com, where you can contribute to this podcast. There is a Patreon button at our website, or you can mail us a letter and or contribution to Science Fiction University, P.O. Box 9133, Springfield, Illinois, 62791.
In this episode, well, let's let Patton Oswalt explain.
And please allow me to finish this because it's going to seem like a bit of a jump. We see Thanos, as you know, owns the Infinity Gauntlet, which has the Time Gem, the Mind Gem, the Power Gem, the Space Gem, and the Reality Gem. If he holds the Reality Gem, that means he can jump from different realities. This will be our link to the Marvel Universe from the Star Wars universe.
Yes, today at Science Fiction University, we're going to discuss the idea of the multiverse in fiction, which you're probably sick of hearing about now. But hang in there because we're going to come at this from an angle that you probably never heard before. But first, here is a quick recap of a few of the more famous or infamous multiversal stories that are out there. There is Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness, which is not very good.
There is The Flash, which we have not seen, but we hear that it's terrible.
Yeah, very, very bad. There is the highly underrated 1993 Last Action Hero starring Arnold Schwarzenegger.
There is Spider-Man No Way Home from 2021, which is okay.
Yeah, it's all right. There is Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse from 2018 and Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse from this year, 2023. Both of which we have seen and both of which are spectacular. Highly recommended. Yeah,
amazing movies.
Stuff. Yeah.
There is the Lego Movie from 2014, which is terrific.
Yeah, great movie. There is, of course, Everything Everywhere All at Once from 2022, which was nominated for 11 Academy Awards and won 7 and deserved everything it won. It was incredible. Wonderful movie.
And then getting to television, Star Trek, the original series episode Mirror, Mirror, which is always in the top 5 or 10 of original series best episode lists. And the franchise even ended up returning to the Mirror universe several times.
And there was a series I will admit to have I watched in the 90s called Sliders, which was pretty cool. It was described once as a sort of lost in space story, but had its cast lost in the multiverse rather than in space.
Is that your manimal, Driftglass? Is Sliders your manimal?
It might be. I think Sliders went on for more episodes than Manimal.
Well, yeah. The reason I watched every Manimal is because I knew there were going to be less than 8 of them because It was so terrible.
Now, here's the thing. Quantum Leap is not a multiverse story.
Yeah.
Because Quantum Leap is a time travel story in which time travel is linear. You go back into your timeline to fix things that are broken and should not have happened or should have happened. So it's not a multiverse story. It's a time travel story.
But Loki, the Marvel series, is a multiverse story.
Yeah, and there's plenty of them. There's lots of multiversal stories out there. Anyway, moving on.
So here's the question. If you're a writer and you already have an entire science fiction universe to explore, you can go to other planets, you can accommodate aliens, faster than light ships, time travel even. You can even do time travel. Why do you need a whole separate multiverse, another universe, or 100 other universes?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Your palette's pretty colorful already. Why do you have to multiply that palette by infinity? Well, partially because the fundamental question of science fiction, which we always address here at Science Fiction University, has always been what if? What if aliens are real? And what if I can travel to the future or past and return to the present? What if robots are plotting against us, Blue Gal? Huh? Have you ever considered that? What about AI? Have you ever considered that? Huh? What if advertising agencies take over the world, which is an actual story and really very good. Fundamentally, what happens if some technology or cultural trend goes on until it changes the entire world? That's the question of what if in science fiction.
But the other half of the what if question is, what if the past had turned out differently?
Yep.
This is the alternative history subgenre of science fiction, which is not necessarily a multiverse.
No.
Novels like Bring the Jubilee by Ward Moore, Guns of the South by Harry Turtledove, both of those posit a world in which the South won the Civil War in America, right? That one.
That's right.
However, in most alternative history stories, there is basically one timeline which we watch unfold differently based on a change in the history we know and understand. Mm-hmm. For example, in the universe of Philip K. Dick's The Man in the High Castle, Giuseppe Zangara succeeds in assassinating President-elect Franklin Roosevelt instead of missing and killing Chicago Mayor Anton Cermak. Since Roosevelt is then dead, the Nazis win World War II.
Yeah.
There is this inciting incident, change in the historical timeline that makes the rest of the timeline different.
And one of our heroes, our protagonist, I believe, runs a curio shop and a jewelry shop and shows a Zippo lighter. Mm-hmm. Said, this Zippo lighter is worth exactly what it's worth. This one has a scratch on it where it deflected the bullet, and it's worth, millions of dollars. So, and that's the moment when that history changed. Now, there is a moment towards the end, as I recall, in Man in the High Castle, where our protagonist sort of sees hazily through a vision a future in which Winston Churchill and the Allies have won the war. Winston Churchill basically goes on to be a warlord. But it's sort of an add-on. It really is a time travel story about this is what happens if history bent the other way, an alternate history story.
It's an alternate history story, yeah.
It's an alternate history story. Star Trek also uses this kind of alternate history as a plot device in two of the best episodes, one from the original series and one from the Next Generation, and a bunch more. But I'm going to focus on these two. In City on the Edge of Forever, the original series by Harlan Ellison, a drug-maddened Dr. McCoy is transported to the 20th century Earth, where he saves the life of soup kitchen operator and future pacifist leader Edith Keeler, who would go on to keep America out of the war just long enough for the Nazis to develop the atom bomb and take over the world, which is bad. So he must prevent that from happening. And in yesterday's Enterprise, which is the Next Generation story, the current to that timeline Enterprise, which is Enterprise D, encounters a crippled USS Enterprise C under the command of Captain Rachel Garrett. It's emerging from a rift in space-time, and it's believed to have been destroyed more than 20 years earlier. So what the hell is it doing here? As this is happening, we see the bridge of the Enterprise D ripple and change, and now it's a warship. And the United Federation of Planets is at war with the Klingons. And the Federation is losing. It's going to lose the war. Only the ship's bartender, Guinan, played by Whoopi Goldberg, senses that reality has shifted. And she meets with Captain Picard and tries to convince him that this is all wrong somehow based on her feeling, her understanding of time, but her feeling. But in all these stories, there's just one timeline, one that has changed from the one we know in ways they're supposed to be either irrevocable or that can be changed back to what they're supposed to be using, science fiction magic and, Heisenberg compensators and warp engines and whatnot. However, as we mentioned before, science fiction, the original series, did in fact have a true multiverse episode called Mirror Mirror, about an alternate universe in which the Federation is now the bloodthirsty Terran Empire, and Mr. Spock has a goddamn goatee.
A goddamn goatee, people!
Which was pretty impressive. I love that episode.
It's a great episode. Yes, it is.
And it's really tight, and it's really good, and it's well plotted. So there are science fiction plot and character reasons for a multiverse. It allows us to explore the what-if question by shifting our point of view back and forth between what is and what might have been. In fact, Marvel TV did a whole animated series called What If to play with those very ideas.
It did. And it is animated, so it gives the writers and producers of that show unlimited ability to make everything happen.
Which,
sometimes that works and sometimes it doesn't. But it is a cartoon. It's a cartoon.
That's what this podcast is about. Sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't.
Yeah. But there's another very human, not childish, but childlike reason for bringing a multiverse to the table, and that is for the fans.
Yeah, for us fans.
As science fiction fans, our favorite characters from novels or movies or comic books or television or anime are a toy box full of our favorite action figures. We love it when they're all dumped out and mixed and matched in new stories just as some of us did when we were children, except now we have whole movie studios doing it with multi-million-dollar budgets. How about a story in which Bruce Wayne's dad, Thomas Wayne, was the one who became Batman?
I'd love to. Could you do that? Would you do that for me, Blue Gal?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Or maybe there's a zombie plague that's unleashed in the Marvel universe and you have zombie Iron Man or something like that. Or all your favorite spider people must band together to fight the very bad supervillain.
We just saw a movie like that.
We did.
Mm-hmm.
And don't forget to cram the X-Men in there somehow.
somehow. There's got to be X-Men, Blue Gal.
You've got to have X-Men doing multiverse things. There's also Hawkman and Martian Manhunter. Got to have him. Also, it'd be cool if you could fit in Red Sun Superman, who was raised by the Soviet state and fought for, quote, Stalin's socialism and the international expansion of the Warsaw Pact, unquote.
Very specific.
Really?
It's very specific. Yeah, such a thing actually exists, yes.
Because even more important than bringing back variations of our favorite heroes is finding a way to pit them against our favorite villains. Because a good villain is so much harder to create than a hero.
True. Very true.
Which is why one of the most sneaky meta lines in Christopher Nolan's 2008 The Dark Knight comes when the Joker has been tossed off a building by Batman. And he could just crush into a little piece of jelly down at the bottom and be never heard from again.
He could.
Right?
It's falling and he's laughing.
End the Joker right there. Gravity.
Which, by the way, was a riff on the original Batman where the Joker actually fell. Jack Nicholson fell from the bell tower and died.
Yep. And died.
But not this one.
In this movie, Batman saves him and pulls him back up like a load of fish. And what does the Joker say?
You won't kill me out of some misplaced sense of self-righteousness. And I won't kill you because you're just too much fun. I think you and I are destined to do this forever.
And you know what? Given how many different Jokers in every medium, that might very well turn out to be true. That they are destined to do this forever. Because Batman and the Joker are the most perfectly balanced protagonist-antagonist pair. I think particularly in this movie.
Yeah, oh, absolutely.
Absolutely. Cesar Romero was great as the Joker in the TV series. But in this movie, they really are wedded together.
Well, yeah. And the Joker, who he is and how he's created, and Batman, who he is and how he's created, are a perfect mirror image of each other. Mm-hmm. And that's what makes them a really good pair of protagonists and antagonists.
Yep. They are perfectly balanced. And that's why various artists and writers keep going back to that well. Let's do Joker Batman.
Yeah.
Over and over and over again. Also, I think Joker has some, I wouldn't call them redeeming qualities, but he understands capitalism. He understands burning a pile of money for television. And there are just things about him that are, if not appealing, fascinating.
Charismatic.
To viewers, right?
Yeah. He's compelling. He's a compelling villain.
Yep. Because we fans do not want our favorite stories to end, we're not going to kill off all the villains.
Right. We can't.
You can't. Go on. And so when the author kills off a fan favorite, whether it's a hero or a villain, there's almost always a way found to bring them back in some form or another. And the handiest device, if you want to stay in canon, is the multiverse. Mm-hmm. Or in the case of Stephen King's Misery, think about what happens when the author kills off a character.
How could you? She can't be dead. Misery Chastain cannot be dead.
Annie, in 1871, women often died in childbirth. But her spirit is the important thing, and Misery's spirit is still alive.
I don't want her dead! I want her! And you murdered her!
Which is not a multiverse story, but still.
The very first modern example we could find of an author being pressured to bring back characters that they had very definitely killed off was Sherlock Holmes and Professor Moriarty, who Arthur Conan Doyle threw off Reichenbach Falls to their watery deaths, no doubt about it, in 1893 in a story called The Final Problem. In 1891, just 2 years before, Conan Doyle had written to his mother, quote, "I think of slaying Holmes and winding him up for good and all. He takes my mind from better things," unquote. Doyle wanted to write great literature, great historic things, and this Holmes thing was killing him. He was wasting all of his time writing this garbage, which, of course, everyone wanted to see because the public wouldn't hear of it. Superman can't be dead. What are you, insane? Misery Chastain can't be dead. So Doyle brought Holmes back in The Hound of the Baskervilles, which is set before The Final Problem, but then restored him fully to life in The Adventures of the Empty House. Or The Adventure of the Empty House. I'm sorry. I pluralized that and I apologize. The last Conan Doyle Holmes story ever wrote was The Adventure of the Shoscombe Old Place. And that's when we learned that Holmes has retired to Sussex to keep bees. This is from the Brisbane Telegraph, an actual newspaper in the real world, Tuesday, December 6th, 1904. Sherlock Holmes to retire. Quote, "Recently, a representative of the London Daily Mail journeyed to Hindhead home of Sir Arthur Conan Doyle to ascertain, if possible, the reasons and circumstances of the famous detective's retirement. Sir Arthur at first would say nothing on the matter, and then he talked for a little while. It was of no interest to anybody. It was merely the conclusion of a series of tales he had been writing, and there was nothing more to be said. Surely everyone was sick of Sherlock Holmes. Quote, 'A man must retire sometime,' he added. 'He can't go on forever. Yes, his retirement is now absolute and final.' Unquote. Gone forever. No more Sherlock Holmes. Forget about it."
Well, and I think if Arthur Conan Doyle had been creating and writing such a popular character in, say, 1980,
Yeah.
he would have syndicated it. There would have been other writers writing with, as a co-writer. There are popular writers these days who aren't writing anymore, but they have somebody writing for them under their name, right?
Well, and we have listened to Kareem Abdul-Jabbar's story, Sherlock Holmes stories.
Yeah, they're very good.
There is an entire Sherlock Holmes universe now. Yep. And of course, you have every detective who followed him, especially House, who are all based on Sherlock Holmes. So he's been copied and aped and taken from for decades, for centuries.
Right. And we're not talking about multiverses here. We're just talking about fandom. Because fandom is an explanation for why we have multiverses.
You can't kill Sherlock Holmes.
You can't kill Sherlock Holmes because Holmes had become such a universally recognized and copied archetype that when called upon, he returns. And so in 1942, speaking of multiverses, here comes a multiverse. 12 years after Arthur Conan Doyle had died, Holmes is brought out of retirement and leaves his bees behind to fight the Nazis in the movie The Voice of Terror, starring Basil Rathbone and Nigel Bruce. Now, there had been Sherlock Holmes movies before that, based on based on old stories. These, the series of movies that were done with Basil Rathbone, who to me is the Sherlock Holmes, Sherlock Holmes of all time. Mm-hmm. These movies were also based on Sherlock Holmes stories by Arthur Conan Doyle. But they include Nazis and beautiful women. Mm-hmm. And 221B Baker Street is sandbagged.
Yeah.
Holmes has to walk around sandbags and talk about, spending the night in the tube and so forth. His experience of being in wartime London during the Blitz is brought into the story to make a propaganda film.
Yeah.
Which is what those were.
And one of your favorite movies, Scarlet Pimpernel.
Yes.
Pimpernel Jones.
Pimpernel Jones is enough. No. Pimpernel Smith.
I'm sorry, Pimpernel Smith.
Pimpernel Smith is the Scarlet Pimpernel written and played by Leslie Howard as fighting the Nazis.
Yeah.
A Professor Smith fighting the Nazis. Yeah, great propaganda movie.
These archetypal heroes are brought back to fight the bad guys.
Fight the bad guys and to rally the troops. Rally all of us during World War II. So our favorites are brought back over and over again because they comfort us and they make us happy. That's the point.
Yeah.
And the introduction of the idea of a multiverse opens up limitless possibilities to mix and match heroes and villains endlessly, which it turns out creates its own sets of problems.
Yeah.
Because with no limits and infinite do-overs, it's very hard for any one character or conflict to have much weight. If you know that Sherlock Holmes isn't going to die off Reichenberg Falls. He's just going to come back. He can never die. Then any peril he goes into isn't really worth investing in.
Well, and that's why Game of Thrones was such a shock, honestly.
Yeah.
Because it completely undermined everyone's idea of what happens to the hero.
Yep.
If the hero gets beheaded in the first season, the good guy dies. I mean, what the hell's going on there? That's why it was so shocking and so effective as a literary device.
Yep. And that's why everybody doesn't tell their friends about the Red Wedding if they haven't read the books.
Shh, don't tell your friends about
Don't say anything. No. So we are 100% anti-censorship here at the Science Fiction University. But as writers, we recognize the need for writers to set rules and set limits and set boundaries. Because you also have to have characters who feel pain and have peril, and that there are consequences in your story. If you throw everything into the blender and there are no consequences and we can just beam to another planet, that leads to a lack of commitment to the story.
Right. It's no drama.
Right.
Drama is about stakes and consequences, and there's no drama. There's no conflict. Now, I once facilitated with another friend of mine a group that was blessed by a bunch of Chicago science fiction writers, the Windy Cedar Writers Group. And we would sit around once a month and trade stories, and we'd critique each other. The Windy City Writers Group.
Oh, for heaven's sakes.
And we were blessed by Phyllis Eisenstein and a bunch of other Chicago writers and said, yes, you may take the name and go forth. And we met at Columbia College about once a month. We'd all come in from out of town or wherever we were. And we'd all email each other our stories, and we critique them. And it got kind of boring after a while because the two of us who were actually good writers, really good writers, nobody ever had any comments for what we wrote. Like, that's really good. That's really excellent. So after a while, both of us felt the need to have someone critique our works other than going into business as professional editors for no pay. So, but one of the things that jumped out at us with one of these up and coming writers, I'm happy to help up and coming writers. I love it when I see science fiction writers, getting on their feet, was this guy just loaded his story up with everything. His hero had, body armor that could never be penetrated. It could travel faster than anything and was indestructible and live forever and could breathe fire and, fart nuclear weapons. And
boring.
Yeah, exactly. It was like, no, dude, you have to have weaknesses. You have to have a way for your hero to feel threat. Because
kryptonite.
If you don't, it's Superman with no kryptonite. It's boring as hell. There's no plot involved. And so throwing every possible thing you could ever want, we're going to do cloning and maybe time travel and maybe faster than light. Like, pick one. Just pick one. But I want to do everything in this story. And it's sort of like, calm down, write one story about one thing, write one story about something else, and don't try to shove everything in the universe, in the multiverse, into one story. So today, you and I are going to talk about one multiversal story that works very well because the writers limited the number of multiverses and used the tools of a different genre to make it work, and a different multiversal story that fails badly. And the multiversal story that succeeds is called Counterpart, which premiered on December 10th, 2017 on the Starz network and ran for 20 episodes across 2 seasons. And here come a few spoilers. If you haven't seen it already, the spoilers are coming, so jump ahead if you don't want to hear the rest of this. It was awesome because it was set in a recognizably modern world in which, in 1987, this 87 we all share, there was an accident in an East German laboratory that caused 2 parallel Earths to be created. One is referred to as the Alpha World, and the other one is called the Prime World. And at the beginning, each world is a perfect copy of the other, and each person in one world has a counterpart in the other world, exactly identical. But then the worlds begin to diverge, especially after 1996, when a flu pandemic kills hundreds of millions of people on the Prime World, which sets their world back technologically, but they make advancements in the life sciences, which the Alpha World does not have. The virus was suspected of being purposely released by the Alpha World into the Prime World, which triggers a tense Cold War between the two worlds. 30 years have passed since the initial accident, and now counterparts are being used as spies and sleeper agents and assassins, which is awesome.
The protagonist of the Alpha World is a character named Howard Silk, played beautifully by J.K. Simmons.
Yeah.
He is, in this world, a timid, low-level office worker who has been working for a Berlin-based United Nations agency, the Office of Interchange, OI, for 30 years. His position is too junior for him to be told what his work actually involves. The OI oversees a checkpoint below its headquarters between parallel Earths. There's just one gateway between the two worlds.
And
It's under the building.
It's Checkpoint Charlie. It's
Checkpoint
very
Charlie,
extensive.
exactly.
A lot of guards, a lot of lights. There's a lot of, and it's very carefully monitored and controlled.
Right. Now, Howard Silk has a counterpart in the Prime world who is a completely different character. And this is what makes it so interesting. Howard Silk in the Prime world is a super spy.
Yes.
He's aggressive. He's able to kill. He's ruthless. He's an intelligence operative. He's high up in the organization. And it's so fun to see Simmons playing both these roles.
It's just wonderful.
And the rest of the cast is also fantastic. Now, events in this story kick into high gear when a powerful rogue faction on Prime executes a plan to get revenge on Alpha. And it secretly has been working on this revenge plan for decades.
Yeah.
You toss into the mix broken families on both sides and the irresistible urge to insinuate yourself into the lives of children or husbands or wives that you may have lost in your world. Oh, wait, my dead wife is alive on the other side? I must go to her, right?
And off this asshole who's married to her, who is actually me. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I must kill myself and pretend to be him in the other world so I can have my wife back. I mean, it's that kind of thing.
And
Not to mention unborn children, right? Oh, you and your wife had a child on that side and I don't have children? I want to meet my daughter. It's mine, right?
The emphasis on the power of that attraction is something that most multiverse stories miss, which is imagine you could have all the things you're missing. It's right over there. It's right over there. Yep.
Right. What if? Again, it's that question, what if? What if you hadn't married your first spouse? Would you meet your second spouse?
Right.
Would you have a happy marriage in the end? Who knows? But, you know, if you have an opportunity to explore that in reality, would you do it? Those are the kinds of questions that Counterpart brings up that really make it compelling to watch episode after episode.
And factor in the fact that some of these people might actually be sleeper cells.
Right. They might be out to kill you.
Right. The wife who you love and think is going to be yours forever might actually be a deep cover agent.
And
from
evil.
The other side.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So why does this particular multiversal story work? First, it's because while the accident that created the multiverse may be the inciting incidents, this is really an espionage thriller. It's like Smiley's People.
Yeah.
It's like everything Le Carré wrote, right?
Yeah.
There's paranoia, there's office politics, there's family drama, there's sexual tension, and it's all within this Cold War environment where everything is very oppressive and terrifying. And people sneaking back and forth, and you don't know who is the good guy and who isn't because they're the same genetic makeup. That's the engine that drives the plot of this show. And so it's not just about the magic trick of moving from one world to another. It's really about the human drama between real people who are trying to manage these two worlds. Second, I have to say this is really important. The makers of Counterpart made very specific choices, what to leave in and what to take out.
Absolutely.
There aren't any superfluous elements to this story. There are characters like Yannick, who is played by James Cromwell, who are introduced in season 2, but they're not throwaways. They are necessary to the plot now, and then we learn, oh, they were back in 1987 when all this stuff began. Oh, they have a history. They did things back then that make sense now. And there aren't dozens of multiverses in this show to keep track of. There's just 2.
Just the 2. Just those 2.
And some people are dead in one world and alive in the other. But you're really focused on the Silk character and his really split personality of being a mild-mannered, loving husband and being a murderous spy, ruthless spy, who who, when he meets his counterpart, is just disgusted.
Yeah. What the fuck is wrong with
you're
this guy?
such a weenie.
Yeah. Yeah. They're swearing. And
Yeah.
all of the big technological and social changes that might fascinate her, they all take place in the background. They're all referred to as historical events, things that happened. They're just there's just props to move the story along. They're not obsessed with the actual nature of the plague or what really happened or this or that gadget. Those are just things that happen in the background. And all the prophylactic devices, all of the hand sanitizing that goes on the world that had the flu are all part of their culture, but that's just daily life to them. They don't call attention
it's daily
to it.
life to them that if your child coughs, you have to report it to the government.
Right. Exactly.
Period. One cough from your child is an emergency because the flu wiped out people on that side of
hundreds of millions of people.
gate.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So finally, it's really important to mention the casting in this is so good. Go look it up if you get a chance. And if you have a chance to watch it, it's great to rewatch it in the summer of 2023.
Yeah.
In addition to well-known actors like Simmons and Olivia Williams and Richard Platt and Stephen Ray, if you go down the list, clock how many times you say, "Oh, I know her. She's from that thing," or "It's the guy from that thing." "Oh yeah, I know him."
It's that guy. And
and
then,
it's that guy. And over and over again, you see these very gifted actors who in the future make a bigger career for themselves. And it's like, oh wow, they're really good in this. The casting director did a really great job.
Yeah. And the color scheme is
the cinematography is very good.
It's not rainbow colored multiverse, spinny, and a big light that shoots up into the sky. It's sepia and it's gray and it's dark blue and it looks like slow horses.
Berlin. It looks like Berlin. Yeah.
It's really, really good. And since my wife just had the pleasure of talking to you in great detail about the one that works, it now falls to me to talk about the multiversal story that failed really big time. And it pains me to say that it is The Number of the Beast, a novel by the late Robert Heinlein, published in 1980. I read it. You can trust me. It's bad. It's really bad. And there are lots of reasons why it's bad, and a lot of reasons why hardcore Heinlein fans felt the need to defend it, even though it's pretty much indefensible. Now, before I go on, I should confess that while I researched the reactions to this book, it led me to discover another book, which was more or less written by Robert Heinlein that I didn't know anything about, didn't know it existed at all.
And for Driftglass to admit that he didn't know about a Robert Heinlein book, that's a big deal.
It's a big deal. I mean, this is Science Fiction University, after all. And we are professionals at this. Discovered among Heinlein's notes was a first draft of this terrible novel that was apparently significantly different than his final draft. It was called The Pursuit of the Panchera, and it wasn't published until 2020. And there may have been lots of competing reasons and theories as to why, including significant copyright issues in 1977. Over time, the manuscript was largely forgotten, but survived in fragments, which were later re-examined, and it became clear that if you piece them together in the right order, they would form a more or less complete novel, which was intended, I suppose, to be a parallel novel to The Number of the Beast. In fact, the subtitle of The Pursuit of the Panchera is a parallel novel about parallel universe. Now, I haven't read it. I have no intention of reading it, but the reviews make it clear that in this draft, Heinlein dialed back on most of his creepy, self-indulgent excesses, and a lot of the adolescent, nudist, orgy aspects of the story have been tamped down. So, sadly, we must now go and talk about The Number of the Beast in detail, which is so named because in the Bible, the number of the beast is 666, and in the novel, the brilliant mad scientist, Jacob Burrows, has discovered that multiple universes exist along a, quote, six-dimensional, non-Newtonian continuum, unquote, the total number of which he calculates as 6 to the 6th power to the 6th power. So there you go. That's
so
why
he's created a multiverse. There it is.
Well, no. He's discovered that a multiverse exists.
Oh, okay.
And that he can access it using a magic device. And there's 6 to the 6 to the 6th number of these multiverses. Now, our main characters are named Zebediah John Carter. There's a programmer named Deja Thoris D.T. Burroughs Carter. Her mathematics professor, dad, Jacob Burroughs. And what's described as an off-campus socialite named Hilda Corners. And they take off in a space car named Gay Deceiver, powered by this multiversal thingy, and pursued through alternate universes by bad guys called Black Hats. If the names like Deja Thoris and Burroughs and Carter seem familiar to you, they should be. They are overt references to John Carter and Deja Thoris, the protagonists of the Barzoom novels by Edgar Rice Burroughs. Heinlein isn't rewriting the Burroughs novels here. He's simply taking character names from them and naming his character, those characters, to tell you what he's about to do. It is a clue to the problems with the novel that will continue to compound themselves until the entire thing collapses under its own ridiculous weight. Because now that Heinlein has his hands on a magic multiversal travel machine, you and I, Blue Gal, will not be dropped into a taut Cold War thriller or a giant multiverse-spanning crisis about the collapse of the timelines and maybe, oh my God, reality itself. No,
Da, da, da.
that's not what's going to happen. Instead, we're going to drop in on Robert Heinlein's favorite places. And his favorite places include the Land of Oz, the Lilliput from Gulliver's Travels, the universe of the jut-jawed Kimball Kinnison, and the Lensman series of E.E. Doc Smith, which are a bunch of novels from the 40s and 50s, which Robert Heinlein liked, and a whole bunch of characters from Robert Heinlein's own novels. Two of our main characters meet, and after one dance, immediately dash off to get married. We're going to pick up Heinlein character Lazarus Long, who is the oldest living human being, who has now cloned himself several times and wants to use the gay deceiver to go back to the moment when his mother was killed so he can save her and then rejuvenate her and then have sex with her. Because, yeah, that's in this book. And you can't unsee it once you've seen it. And did I mention breasts? Have I mentioned breasts recently, Blue Gal? Yes, women's breasts are constantly on proud display and being ogled by all the men, and they love it. Everybody loves looking at everybody else's big, big, big breasts and kissing, and their teeth meet. And this is also called the Sprung novel because there's a line in there about our teeth grated together and my nipples went sprung. And that is a Robert Heinlein line that you cannot unhear.
He
once
wrote
you've heard
that
him say it.
sentence.
He did. He wrote that sentence. And the whole book is kind of like that.
Oh, my God.
Yeah.
So I don't know who wrote this, but this is the blurb from inside the book flap. And it kind of gives you a key to the quality of writing we're talking about.
Well, it gives you a key to what they're trying to sell.
Quote, when two male and two female supremely sensual, unspeakably cerebral humans find themselves under attack from aliens who want their awesome quantum breakthrough, they take to the skies and zoom into the cosmos on a rocket roller coaster ride of adventure and danger, ecstasy and peril.
Yes, it sounds
Unquote.
like it really does.
This book has everything.
It has everything in it. Oh my God, it's a Harlequin romance in space and time. Yeah, it's bad.
And not to belabor the point too much, but it is worth reading these two paragraphs from the Science Fiction and Fantasy book review from 2011. Quote, terrible, simply terrible. Robert Heinlein's The Number of the Beast, eagerly anticipated as his big comeback 7 years after Time Enough for Love, isn't just bad, it's stupefyingly, dizzyingly awful. Reading it, you'd think you were struggling through an unsolicited slush pile manuscript rather than the work of one of the genre's grand masters. The parts of the book that want to be funny aren't funny. The parts that want to be sexy are so gross they turn Hugh Hefner asexual. And the parts that want to be exciting are just bizarre. Had anyone's byline but Heinlein's been on it, it would have been rejected outright by any respectable publisher. The title is fitting. This book is the Antichrist. First off, sweet mother of God, these characters. From what spectacularly bizarre series of lifetime observations did Heinlein get the idea that people, actual Homo sapiens, talk and act this way? Yes, I understand. In fiction, particularly imaginative fiction, one must allow for creative license, particularly from an author who's known for letting his sense of whimsy run riot in his work. But what it ultimately boils down to is whether or not, even given the context of the story at hand, readers can believe in your characters, find them relatable and sympathetic, let alone realistic. And not only could I find no reason whatsoever to like our quartet of flamboyant, eccentric, time-space hopping horn dogs all that much, I didn't believe them either for 1 picosecond. And that's worse. Unquote.
Yeah, it's bad. Now, there is an organization called the Heinlein Society, which is a well-respected and well-developed fan site, but it has board of directors and boards of advisors and so forth, which is, very respectable. And, they kind of felt obliged to defend this mess and, or at least sort of stand up to the worst of the withering criticism. So there are a couple of quotes from them. Quote, considered by some, 90% of the critics, to be one of the more confusing of Heinlein's works, confusing is a very gentle word for this, the novel The Number of the Beast was written late in his career. It begins with the fastest falling in love sequence since Romeo and Juliet and ends with a party at which many of Heinlein's characters and many of his real-life friends appear, unquote. Then it goes on to this is a 1999 review, goes on to a quote by a well-known Usenet fan. Remember Usenet? Named David. And David says this about that. Quote, you folks are all way off base. You've missed what's really going on here. The Number of the Beast is the most massive and wonderful practical joke ever played on the speculative fiction genre reading public, unquote. No, you're wrong. It's not. It's just a very bad novel. And by the way, that kind of reasoning is the kind of reasoning that young Robert Heinlein would have spit on. The idea that you just missed how cool this art is. You just don't understand. You're not sophisticated enough to see the real deep meaning under all the perceived garbage. No, if you fail as a writer to convey the story you wanted to tell, that's on you, dude. And he failed badly. Now, part of the reason this novel sucked undoubtedly had to do with the fact that at the time, Robert Heinlein was suffering from an undiagnosed arterial blockage that was starving his brain of oxygen. He was physically weak and he was sleeping like 18 hours a day. And this state of mind definitely had a lot to do with the quality of his work during this part of his career. But another part of the reason is that childlike yearning to empty out the toy box and play with everything all at once. Heinlein's toy box contained nudism and fucking and Oz and Mars and breasts, lots of breasts, and women with red hair, and all of his favorite characters from all of his own stories. And did I mention breasts? And
yes, you mentioned breasts, Driftglass.
And I just want to emphasize, a lot of breasts in this. And several of his friends from the real world. So he just dumped all of that pell-mell into a 500 self-indulgent page novel and invented villains whose only function really was to make our protagonist scamper from one universe to the next, which is why haikus have rules.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yep.
So finally, to talk about the multiverse again, it really is nothing more than a plot device like time travel or spaceships. It is a means to bring the characters you want to talk about to the places you need them to go in order to tell the story you want to tell. But while having other universes to explore or plunder opens up a lot of new possibilities, without a lot of focus and intention and making conscious choices, the sheer number of those possibilities can overwhelm an undisciplined writer, for whatever reason they are undisciplined.
Mm-hmm.
Whether they're just inexperienced or they have a undiagnosed arterial blockage to their brain.
Mm-hmm.
If you don't have the discipline to say yes to some things and no to others, you're not going to put together a book that makes sense.
Do you remember Michael Douglas in Wonder Boys?
Yes. And he had a 7,000-page book.
And his unfinished novel, and the student, who's also his lover, is going, remember how you taught us in class about writing novels is about making decisions? It looks like you haven't decided anything here. When you get to the horse's ancestors' lineage, maybe you've gone too far. It's because he's depressed and smoking pot all the time. And he has no direction, and his life is wrecked, and he can't be with the woman he loves and a bunch of other stuff. But he's not focusing on telling the story. And his agent is there, who's also played by Robert Downey Jr., by the way. Great movie. But it is about not making any choices. And that's really what the multiverse has done in Robert Heinlein's novel. He has made no choices. He just wants everything, all the candy.
He wants a party where there are a lot of big-breasted women with red hair.
Right.
And all his friends.
And
he wants to take them to magical places that he loves, like the Wizard of Oz.
Right.
Right.
And he does.
Yeah. Because at that point in his career, he's Robert Heinlein.
Yeah.
And he can do that. Right. Right. So if you want to make a compelling work of fiction, you got to kill your darlings. Isn't that it? Murder your darlings?
That's right. Yep.
You've got to really let go of the things, everything. You have to let go of everything and just choose to tell just this story this time.
Mm-hmm.
I want to go back to Mirror Mirror for a minute, because that as an alternate universe and a multiverse, because Kirk and Spock in our universe, as we understand it in Star Trek, the original series, they are aware that this is an alternate universe.
They are.
And so we see it through their eyes, and we know, okay, this Terra place with the bearded Spock is a different universe from the one that we experience in the series.
Mm-hmm.
And we also have the advantage of seeing that the Spock in the alternate universe has some restraints in his mentality that Kirk should be able, we have it in our sense of who Spock is, that our Kirk should be able in some way to reach bearded Spock. Of all the people on the ship who are completely out of control and barbaric, and not that Vulcans in this alternate universe aren't barbaric. We're pretty sure they're terribly barbaric and very violent, but they also have Vulcan logic. And Kirk is able to appeal to bearded Spock, alternate Spock, through logic. What will make sense in that world? And what's going to happen to your universe? What's going to happen to your empire? Ultimately, and Spock, the alternate Spock, knows that his empire maybe has a couple hundred years left, maybe 300 years left.
Can't last.
It's going to burn out.
Yeah.
And so Kirk appeals to his logic and says, "Does that make any sense to use your energy to live through this experience and not change it?" And it makes sense. It makes sense to appeal to that character because he has within his composition enough logic to reach him in some way.
Right. Logic trumps the barbarism of the culture.
The barbarism of the alternate universe. Yeah. And then the other thing I love about that episode is, and it is a key to the whole episode, it is the point where our Spock points out to Kirk, look, it's easier for us to pretend to be barbarians than for barbarians to pretend to be sane and logical people.
Right. Decent. Yeah. Yeah.
And so that's why we don't have to deal with barbaric Kirk in our Enterprise.
Yeah.
He is immediately seen to be off.
Right.
He's probably looking for his murder button in his quarters.
Where's my murder button?
Where's my button so I can kill anyone on this ship?
Well,
and our Spock goes, eyebrow raised. What is going on here?
Well, it was 4 crew members, and they spotted him immediately.
Yeah,
they spot them immediately. Yeah, and they know they know something has gone drastically wrong, and they figure it out. And both Spocks
and both Kirk in the brig.
Right. Well, they put all of them in the brig.
Yeah.
All 4 of them in the brig because they're they're violent, they're armed. Yeah. And both Spocks in both universes work to undo what has been done because Spock wants his Kirk back.
Right.
You know, we need to get our guy back. You need to get you guys got to get the hell out of here. So it's logical to want to undo this thing.
Yep.
But it all comes to a head over 2 clashing timelines with 2 drastically different cultures and logic, which is number 1 value in Gene Roddenberry's humanity, peace, tolerance, and logic, being reasonable, being rational, trumps everything. Mm-hmm. That's the value you can appeal to when the culture itself is barbaric, but only if it's
and also Kirk being a womanizer. That's also critical to Star Trek.
Well,
so the captain has a captain's woman.
Right.
And she could use that button too. It turns out she knows where it is.
Yeah.
So.
Well, if I might say, the key to being a good womanizer is knowing where the button is, baby. Knowing where the button is.
All right.
All
now,
right.
now you're going full Heinlein, I'm afraid.
That's a goddamn Heinlein novel. Yeah.
Science Fiction University is a project of DGBG Productions. You can support the show by donating via Patreon or PayPal. Details at our website, sciencefictionuniversity.com. We love you, and we'll see you next time.
And we'll see you next time. Farewell.